He was a monster that struck fear into every man who heard his name. In just a few short years, he raped and murdered 15 men, then flushed all their bodies down the toilet. That is, until one day, the sewer was completely clogged with a tangled mess of body parts. A plumber was called in to inspect. When he lifted the manhole cover that hadn't been opened in years, he uncovered the cold-blooded, mind-bending crimes of this devil. On the 8th of February 1983, more than a dozen police officers surrounded a building at 23 Cranley Gardens, Muswell Hill, London. Just an hour earlier, a plumber had collapsed in shock here. A drain on the ground was wide open. When the officers peered inside, they saw piles of flesh and fingers still attached to joints. The younger officers immediately ran to the side and vomited violently. This wasn't a sewer, it was a living hell on earth. The police couldn't tell how many people were down there just by looking, but they were certain there was more than one body. A quick inspection by technical staff confirmed the blockage stretched more than halfway from the inside of the building to the outside. The source of the contamination had to be the top floor of the entire building. The tenant of the top floor was Dennis Andrew Nilsen, a 37-year-old executive at a nearby job center who clocked out at 5:30 p.m. sharp every day like clockwork. The police decided to lie in wait, staking out the apartment door for the suspect to return. At that moment, they only knew they were dealing with a heinous crime, but they were completely unprepared for the hellscape that awaited them behind that door. During the 3-hour wait, the officers pictured the target in their minds countless times. Anyone who could chop up bodies into pieces small enough to flush down a toilet was no ordinary criminal. At exactly 5:30 p.m., Nilsen appeared right on schedule. A crisp shirt, glasses perched on his nose, and a mild-mannered demeanor, he looked exactly like an average office worker. When he saw the police at his door, he didn't panic at all. There was only a faint, barely noticeable look of confusion on his face, as if he was wondering why the police were at his home. The police didn't make a move right away. Instead, they asked to go upstairs to check the drain, citing a plumbing issue. Nilsen's lips twitched into a slight smile. He stepped aside to let them in, sounding almost teasing. The moment the apartment door swung open, a thick stench of decay flooded the hallway. No amount of air freshener could mask the sickly sweet, putrid odor of decomposing human flesh. The smile froze on Nilsen's face. A flicker of panic flashed across his eyes. Surprisingly, Nilsen didn't try to make a frantic excuse or resist arrest. He just sighed softly, feigning disbelief. It wasn't until the police pressed him harder, demanding to know where the rest of the bodies were, that he fell silent for a few seconds. Then, in a voice as calm as still water, he pointed to another room, in the plastic bags. What the police found during their subsequent search left even the most seasoned detectives gasping for air. Black plastic bags in the wardrobe held dismembered body parts and 2 human heads. A wooden crate concealed torsos, bones, and skulls. Under the bathroom drawers, they dug up legs and pelvic bones. These were the remains of only 3 victims. But on the way to the police station, Nilsen casually dropped a line that sent chills down every officer's spine. It wasn't 1 or 2, probably around 16. Dennis Nilsen was born in Fraserburgh, a remote fishing village in northeastern Scotland. This land, surrounded by the sea, had relied on fishing for generations. It sustained the locals' livelihoods, but it also hid countless unexplained deaths. Nilsen's mother's family had lived here for generations. His father, however, was just a passing Norwegian soldier. Their brief encounter left behind not only Nilsen, but also a childhood marred by the absence of a father's love. As the middle child of 3, Nilsen was always an outcast, a lonely boy who didn't fit in. He hated playing with kids his age, preferring to sit alone in a corner, his eyes filled with a darkness far beyond his years. The neighbors all thought there was something off about him. He had a violent aversion to physical contact. His mother later admitted she'd never been able to truly hug her son. The only person Nilsen was willing to get close to was his grandfather. With his father gone, his grandfather became the only light in his childhood. A gentle fisherman, he would take Nilsen for walks along the beach, squat with him on the docks to fish, and listen patiently to all his childish thoughts. To Nilsen, his grandfather was the only person who ever made him feel loved, the only comfort in his lonely childhood. But a fisherman's job meant long absences. His grandfather often had to sail for weeks to work in the North Sea fishing grounds, leaving Nilsen alone in an empty house, waiting day after day. That wait would never end with a happy reunion. One day, Nilsen came home from school. His mother told him he could go see his grandfather. Overjoyed, he rushed into the kitchen, only to find not his grandfather's familiar figure, but a long wooden box laid out on the table. His grandfather was lying inside it. No one had warned him. His grandfather had died in a fishing accident at sea, and his body had been brought home for burial. At 6 years old, Nilsen faced death for the first time and lost the only warmth in his life. His mother told him his grandfather had gone to a better place, but Nilsen couldn't help wondering, if it was heaven, why didn't he take me with him? This twisted thought led Nilsen to do something terrifying. He would often sneak down to the beach alone and pretend to drown, trying to follow his grandfather in this way. In his subconscious, death wasn't an end, it was a form of eternal companionship. This morbid obsession with death festered in his childhood, planting the first seed of his future crimes. At 15, Nilsen left the fishing village filled with painful memories and joined the British Army, enlisting in the catering corps. In the army, Nilsen quickly distanced himself from the other recruits. He was stubborn, rebellious, and loved to argue just for the sake of it. If someone said a photo was black and white, he'd insist it was white and black. While his comrades listened to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, flipping through tabloid magazines, Nilsen buried himself in serious newspapers and classical music. During a bar fight, while the other soldiers threw punches, he only dared to scratch and slap. He was mocked for being unmanly, but he didn't care not one bit. Because he was hiding a secret, he dared not speak aloud. He was gay. In the British Army of that era, homosexuality was an absolute taboo. If exposed, he would face endless discrimination, harassment, and expulsion. Nilsen had to bury this part of himself deep down, living a double life. A rule-following soldier by day, a repressed man drowning his desires by night. This long-term repression warped his already twisted mind even further. His hobby of photography became an outlet for his sick urges. He would ask his comrades to pretend to be dead soldiers, posing them in various positions, then photographing them with meticulous precision. His comrades thought it was just a weird joke and played along. No one knew that behind the camera lens, Nilsen was savoring the feeling of controlling life. These motionless bodies couldn't resist, couldn't refuse. They perfectly satisfied his desperate craving for companionship and control, and they also taught him the ins and outs of human anatomy, laying the groundwork for his future murders. After 11 years in the army, Nilsen was promoted to lance corporal. His innate desire for control only grew stronger with power. His subordinates secretly called him a tyrant behind his back. But on the eve of his 27th birthday, he suddenly abandoned the familiar order and routine of military life, moving to London alone. London in the 1970s was seeing a rise in its gay scene. For Nilsen, this should have been a paradise of freedom, but it ultimately became a breeding ground for evil. When he first arrived in London, Nilsen easily made a good impression with his mild speech and polite manners. But as people got to know him better, they realized he was extremely self-centered. He never listened to others, only talked about himself. Gradually, everyone around him began to keep their distance. To make a living, he joined the London Metropolitan Police, hoping to satisfy his control freak tendencies with the power of a police badge. But the conflict between his double life proved too much to bear. He resigned after just 11 months. Later, Nilsen found a job as a civil servant at a downtown human resources center, returning to a seemingly respectable life. But his loneliness only grew worse. By day, he was a quiet, reserved office worker. By night, he would return to his apartment, drinking alone and listening to music. Alcohol became his escape from reality and a catalyst for his darkest desires. He cared far more about controlling machines and objects than about human emotions. In 1976, Nilsen met a homeless man named David Galichin and offered him a place to stay, hoping to build a stable companionship. But his innate controlling nature and drinking problem quickly drove their relationship to the brink. He would fly into rages over trivial things, ordering Galichin around, even resorting to violence. Galichin tried countless times to get him to quit drinking, but nothing worked. After 18 months of living together, he finally left for good. This abandonment was the final straw for Nilsen. He became even more withdrawn and deranged, starting to invite strangers back to his apartment, desperate to find someone who would never leave him. This desperate longing eventually twisted into an urge to kill. On New Year's Day 1979, the 33-year-old Nilsen woke up with a hangover. Beside him lay a teenage boy he'd met at a bar the night before. Staring at the boy's sleeping face, a wave of intense fear washed over him. He was terrified the boy would leave when he woke up, terrified of being alone again. This fear quickly turned into a murderous impulse. He got up, grabbed a tie next to him, and silently wrapped it around the boy's neck, pulling tight. Nilsen later admitted he was shocked by the strength that surged through him. Normally not a strong man, in that moment, he had enough power to take a life. When the boy stopped breathing, turning into a cold, lifeless body, Nilsen felt no guilt at all. Instead, he felt a sense of peace he'd never known before. He had finally kept someone with him. For the next week, he treated the body like a lover, washing it, drying it off, dressing it in clothes, carrying it to bed to sleep with, propping it up in an armchair to watch TV together, even talking to it as if it could respond. He savored this twisted companionship. It wasn't until the body started to decompose and smell that Nilsen realized he had a problem to deal with. He stripped the body naked and buried it under the floorboards of his apartment, leaving it to rot in the dark for nearly 8 months. Then he dug it up, carried it to the garden, and burned it to ashes. To mask the smell, he threw rubber tires into the fire. The flames devoured the body, and the ashes were scattered by the wind as if the boy had never existed at all. It wasn't until 2005 that the identity of this unnamed boy was confirmed. Stephen Holmes, a 14-year-old runaway. His death was just the beginning of Nilsen's killing spree. London's Soho district became Nilsen's hunting ground. It was full of young people who had come to London chasing their dreams, most of them homeless, runaways, or marginalized by society. Even if they disappeared, few people would report them missing. They were the perfect victims in Nilsen's eyes. He was a skilled observer, able to spot lonely people craving companionship in an instant. He would invite them back to his apartment for a drink and a place to stay, his voice warm and gentle. These vulnerable young people could rarely resist this sudden kindness. In his apartment on Melrose Avenue, Nilsen killed 11 more young men, bringing his total to 12, including Stephen Holmes. His modus operandi was chillingly consistent. Invite the victim home, strangle them with a tie or belt while they weren't looking, and if they resisted, pin them down until they stopped breathing. After the murder, he repeated the same routine. Clean the body, keep it with him for days, wait until it decomposed, then chop it up. Some parts he buried under the floorboards, others he burned in the garden, using rubber tires to hide the smell. The neighbors often smelled a strange stench and saw bonfires in his garden, but they all thought Nilsen was just burning trash or having a barbecue. No one ever suspected the truth. Local kids even danced and played around the bonfires, completely unaware that the flames were consuming the remains of innocent people. Nilsen's obsessive-compulsive traits made him keep his apartment spotlessly clean. He erased all traces of his crimes, allowing him to evade police suspicion for a full 4 years. His double life as a respectable civil servant by day and a brutal killer by night was flawless. In October 1981, Nilsen moved to the top-floor apartment at 23 Cranley Gardens. This apartment had no space under the floorboards to bury bodies, and no large garden to burn them in. But this didn't stop him from killing. It only made his methods more brutal and extreme. In this cramped space, he killed 3 more young men. To dispose of the bodies, he began boiling the victims' skulls, stripping off the muscle tissue, chopping the remains into small pieces, and flushing them down the toilet. The rest of the body parts were stuffed into black plastic bags, hidden in the wardrobe, wooden crates, and bathroom corners, left to rot away. Carl Stott, a 21-year-old man, was one of the few to escape Nilsen's clutches alive. He met Nilsen at a bar and was invited back to his apartment for the night. He fell asleep, then suddenly woke up gasping for air, realizing Nilsen was strangling him with a tie. He fought back with all his strength, but it was no use. He lost consciousness, convinced he was going to die. When he woke up again, he was lying on the bathroom floor. Nilsen was sitting beside him, drinking and smoking, his voice calm as if he hadn't just tried to kill someone. Nilsen had initially thought Carl was dead, and he'd slipped into a trance, as if someone else had committed the murder. When he realized Carl was still breathing, he suddenly switched back to his kind mode, covering him with a blanket, massaging his legs to improve blood circulation, even performing CPR and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, pulling Carl back from the brink of death. For the next 3 days, Nilsen took care of Carl, making up a ridiculous story about him tripping and getting tangled in a sleeping bag to cover up the attempted murder. Carl actually believed him at first. It wasn't until he left that he slowly realized he'd been the target of a premeditated killing. Carl wasn't the only victim Nilsen strangled and then revived. But most of these survivors chose to keep quiet about their ordeal, too ashamed and scared to report it to the police. This allowed Nilsen to keep killing without being caught. As the number of bodies piled up, the stench of decay in the apartment grew stronger and stronger. The drains kept getting clogged, and the other tenants' complaints became more frequent. Nilsen tried to mask the smell with air freshener and did everything he could to unclog the pipes, but he couldn't contain the leakage of his evil forever. After his arrest, Nilsen showed a shocking level of cold, detached calm. He confessed all his crimes without hesitation, voluntarily telling the police every detail of each murder, from picking his targets, to strangling his victims, to disposing of their bodies. He described every step clearly and in detail, holding nothing back and feeling no remorse at all. The police interrogated him 16 times over several months. Throughout it all, he remained calm and articulate, as if he was telling someone else's story, completely unaffected by the horrors he had committed. When asked why he could be so cold-blooded, Nilsen stated flatly that he had no tears for his victims, for himself, or for the victims' families. He even analyzed his own motives, suggesting 2 possibilities. Either he was weak and incompetent, unable to handle the pressure, and took revenge on society in a drunken haze, or he was inherently evil and selfish. But to the police, these were nothing more than excuses for his crimes. He wasn't weak, and he wasn't driven to kill by society. He killed simply to satisfy his sick desires, taking innocent lives without a second thought. During the interrogations, Nilsen revealed another chilling detail. If he hadn't been caught in time, he would never have stopped killing. If it wasn't 15 victims, it would have been 150. Killing had become an uncontrollable instinct for him, like an addiction he couldn't kick. In November 1983, Dennis Nilsen was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge described his actions as cruel, cold-blooded, and extremely dangerous, stating that life imprisonment was the only just punishment for his crimes. Nilsen died of a lung infection in a prison hospital in 2018 at the age of 72. His death barely made the news. Much like his life, it was filled with controversy and darkness. But the 15 men he killed deserve to be remembered forever. Most of them were marginalized people, homeless, runaways, unemployed. Because of their vulnerable status, no one noticed when they disappeared, making them the forgotten victims. Some of them have never been identified to this day. The most terrifying thing about Nilsen's case is his banality of evil. He had no terrifying face, no vicious appearance. He was just a mild-mannered, respectable civil servant. But beneath that ordinary exterior lurked a cold, twisted heart. This ordinariness made people let their guard down, allowing him to approach his targets easily and take their lives without mercy. So that's the end of today's story. Thanks for watching. If you have any thoughts or opinions, drop a comment below. Let's discuss them together. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.